See, I think everybody, we're all at different stages. You know, we can have the same label on our path, but we're all at different stages on that path, and so we're going to express it differently. I mean, certainly in the Buddhist one, and certainly the Tibetan Buddhists, who are the ones that I think in the different cultures in the world have really they're the only ones that have retained the more esoteric teachings, the more advanced, more esoteric, incredibly sophisticated teachings, the Tibetans, you know. So that's where you really engage at the most, where you identify then with your bliss, you identify with the perfection, you identify with your Buddha nature, and you practice identifying with joy.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing. And yes, you've heard me here before, and you hear it over and over again. It's Christmas Day. I go down to the tree, and the universe has brought me this incredible being. I'm so grateful to welcome to the podcast today a Buddhist nun, Robina. How are you, my dear friend?
I'm happy to be here, and I'm feeling pretty good today. Thank you very much, son, and I'm delighted to talk to you. Let's have a conversation.
Yes. I mean, this is the kind of conversations that I welcome and I get very excited to be a part of, because there's never enough insight into exploring oneself and realizing that, you know, once you get a level up, a heads up, we're all as one is all cut from the same cloth, however you want to cut it.
That's
and
it.
that realization comes in all forms. And what better way than to have a conversation with yourself about the practices and methods you use to find your own way and share with others, and have for many decades. So I'd love you to share with the audience just a little bit about yourself leading up to this point.
Okay. Well, I think I was born up down the road from you. I think you were born in Sydney and I was born south of there, about 500 miles in Melbourne, right? And anyway, I was born there in 1944, year of the monkey. So I'm Sagittarius. I like all that. And I was brought up in a Catholic family. I was the second of 7 kids, and my father wasn't a Catholic. My mother was. And I remember when I first went to Mass, maybe a little girl, I must have been so young, because I was so delighted when I went to Mass. I discovered it was my job, not the altar boy, the priest, you know. I wanted to be the boss. So I announced I'm going to be a priest. And of course, they all laughed and told me that I couldn't because I was a girl. But I think I was so young that intellectually I couldn't comprehend it, that I don't know what it meant. What do you mean I'm a girl, you know? They said I had to be a nun. So I put that into my mind. So then I think I was very rebellious. At the same time, holy. I was in love with God, Our Lady, the saints, went to Mass on my bicycle, knew the Mass in Latin. But on the outside, I was the naughtiest, rebellious kid on the planet, you know. So it was curious how these two parts of myself lived together. I went to a Catholic convent, was educated there for 12 years. So anyway, I was about 19 in 1963, 64, and I decided it's time to say goodbye, God, and hello, boys. But I didn't have guilt. I never had that drama, you know. So I just went in that direction, and that was I was studying music with my mother. She's a classical musician, and she was teaching me singing. So she had great hopes for me. So when I was about 23, she sent me off to London to continue my singing, but I kind of, you know, gave up, you know, I sort of gave that up and started getting seriously now into being a hippie. And then that gradually moved into sort of radical left politics and demonstrating and getting arrested on Fleet Street. And that moved into black politics, and that moved into feminist politics. So I think about 10 years, very intense. My nature is intense, very quick, going through these stages of thinking. You know, I didn't articulate it like that then, but clearly it was that. I was looking for a way of seeing the world, a way of interpreting, a way of analyzing, a way of understanding the world and why there was suffering in particular, you know. So I remember a pivotal point for me when I was about 15, before all that. I remember hearing, my mother was a classical musician. We weren't allowed to listen to Elvis, nothing else. But I remember hearing Black American music, and it blew my mind because it was an opening into another whole world, you know, human experience. And so that was very powerful for me. Anyway, those 10 years of intensive political activity, and gradually, I think I joke about it, but it's true. I'd sort of exhausted all options of who to blame for the suffering of the world, you know. First, it was all the non-Catholics, and then it was all the straight people, and then it was all the rich people, and then it was all the white people, and then it was all the male people. So I really literally had no one left to blame. And then I met these Tibetans. I was back in Australia when I was about 29, mid-70s, and I went to a Tibetan Buddha. I was doing martial arts. I thought I'd found my path, you know. And I broke my foot. A very kind man ran over my foot, and I saw this poster, and I saw this Tibetan name. And that was it. I went to this course, and that was where I met these teachers, and here I am. I fell into their lap on the first day, I think. So here I am 45, 46 years later, still working on it one step at a time, using this as my working hypothesis. I put it that way, this Tibetan Buddhist, or the Buddhist analysis of the world, of how to become your own person. I love that saying in our culture, isn't it? There's this lovely saying in Buddhism that a bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. So you could argue that compassion, which is empathy, which is connectedness to others, the eliminating of the neurotic separate self, that's the final goal. But you've got to sort of put yourself together first. So the wisdom wing is all the nuts and bolts of using the Buddhist analysis of the human consciousness, of who you are, where you are, digging deep, unpacking, unraveling this person, and sorting yourself out and becoming this marvelous, fulfilled, content person so that you can be a benefit to others. And that's the path I'm on, still going one step at a time. So far, so good.
Good on you, mate.
Good on you. Highest praise in Australia. Good on you, mate.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is so refreshing. I find it interesting. You went down the Catholic path because this is a belief system also.
Yes.
What separated you from that made you realize that this is not for you?
Well, I mean, at first it wasn't for me when I was 19, and then I tried radical lefty, communist, feminist, all the political views, and then I finally got to the Buddhist one. I know my first Buddhist course, the revelation for me really in the Buddhist one, and there are many similarities, and I'll mention, but the one that was the revelation for me that I'd felt I'd missed in my life was this and they're very clear about this in the Buddhist analysis, in the Buddhist view, and especially the Tibetan tradition, different from maybe the Zen and from different countries. But in the Tibetan tradition, there's this very strong monastic university system where they study 20, 30 years, this Buddhist worldview. And I know I wanted that as well as, because you don't, in their view, you don't separate the intellectual from the experiential. It's a stepping stone. And I wanted this coherent view. And so the Buddhist one that I found most powerful was that your own mind or your consciousness, which is not physical, doesn't come from your mother and daddy. It's not a function of your brain. And certainly there's no such concept as a creator. I mean, this idea that you're sort of created by some other being out there is very weird for the Buddhist view. That you're your own person and your own consciousness is this beginningless continuity of mental moments, and you bring it with you, and everything you think and do and say, this concept of karma is like self-creation, as the Dalai Lama says, that everything you think and do and say is what produces you. You are the producer of yourself, basically. So that's what I love, the idea that someone else is responsible for me. I didn't like that I could be my own boss. I thought that was very delicious. That was very powerful for me. And so I find experientially in practice, when you're taking responsibility for yourself and not blaming everybody else, because, like you blame God for making you, you blame your mother for making you. We don't seem to blame our father. I think our mums get the blame, Here, you can't blame anybody. You are your own person. You come fully programmed into this life with your own stuff, and then it's up to you to transform and to become this marvelous person that we actually are in our bones, which is clear and wise and compassionate and empathetic and beneficial. So so for me, the concept of a creator is just not viable.
Yeah. So,
go on.
No, I was going to say no. Continue. I'll ask the question after you're done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was interesting in Melbourne years ago. The Catholic University asked me to give a talk at this conference. One of my old friends from school, when I was at the Catholic convent, they invited me, and I had this 20-minute slot. And I didn't know what to talk about, in this little conference. So I looked up a dictionary for the definition of God. And it said 3 essential qualities: infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, and infinite power. And I thought, well, that's interesting from the Buddhist perspective. That's the potential. That is what a Buddha is called. And the word Buddha is just, the etymology is Bud implies the eradication of all the rubbish and nonsense and a separate sense of self. And Da implies developing to perfection, goodness and wisdom. So I thought, well, and the difference is for the Buddha, those qualities are all of our potential. We don't need to be made by anybody. And we all have that natural potential to be perfected, to be good and to be wise and to be compassionate. So my talk was the similarities between the definition of Buddha and God. I don't know if the Catholics liked it, but that was what my talk was about. So, the concept of a creator is what I have a problem with. Don't need creating. Whereas the concept of perfection and goodness and wisdom and compassion, that's pretty nice. And the Buddhist view is we've all got that potential, and it's up to us to cultivate it. It's all there within us,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very similar to a Taoist sort of like perspective.
Exactly. There's so much similarity, like cousins, really coming from the same background and source, I'd say.
Yeah, where the stillness between the breath in and the breath out is the Wu Ji. you know, the mother of all things. You are all things. You're all is one, one is all. I mean, from a Taoist perspective, it's like the mountain has yin and yang, and you go up the mountain, you merge with one and be one with everything. And that realization of who you really are is that.
Yeah. I think the sources are so similar. I think just maybe different methodology. There are different ways up that mountain, as you said. You know.
Well, let's lean a little bit more on the concept, and this may vary from different sort of sects or different belief systems, but this suffering, looking for the pain and suffering, one of my Buddhist monk friends calls the dukkha. He's always alert for being the observer to the dukkha, the distortion. Where does that lie within how you see things?
I understand. Yeah, well, the Buddhist analysis is really, I mean, this is why I like this word Buddha. You know, Buddha implies the eradication of all the nonsense, the limiting stuff, the stuff that, which is the stuff of this separate sense of a neurotic I. And then Da implies the development to perfection of all of our marvelous potential of goodness and clarity and wisdom. And then that's, when you've accomplished that, that's what Buddha, you're fully enlightened, your consciousness pervades the universe, you're connected to all others, there's no sense of a separate self, blah, 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 you know. And so if that's true, then you need to have this methodology to develop that. And so the Buddha is saying we have to identify what it is that's preventing me this second from being this Buddha, which is my potential. You know, it's nice to say that you're already Buddha. Well, it's sort of a bit like saying, well, no, okay, they all say we've got Buddha nature. So, and that means, but sometimes we can mistake that and think, well, I'm already a Buddha. Well, it's a bit like saying that an acorn, which has oak tree nature, it's not yet an oak tree. You can't say it is. Try to get shade from an acorn. You'll be very disappointed. But if you know that an acorn has all that potential there, you need to find the methods to uncover it, to allow it to grow, you know. And so the Buddha would say what's holding us back from being who we really are is this presence of a separate self, neurotic and attached and needy and unhappy and anxious and worried and jealous and depressed. And that this stuff, and his crucial point is, this is not intrinsic to us. This is not at the core of our being, but it's what's holding us back. So we shouldn't just ignore it. You've got to, if you've got a problem, you've got to identify what it is, label it accurately, know the causes, and then that will give you the solution. So the first stages of work in Buddhist practice, which is the wisdom wing, is really learning to understand this presentation, and then using meditation techniques to dig deep and drill down and unpack and unravel the neuroses, and then enable and then practice chucking them out, practice not buying into them, and then growing slowly into the wisdom and compassion. So it's a very organic process, and it's super psychological. I mean, it's the mind, you know. Buddha didn't say psychology, he didn't speak Greek. We love our Greek words in the West. But he deals with consciousness, with mind. That's his expertise, you know. So it's this process of, we are who we are that, but we have to uncover it and discover it and be it, you know. So, and it's very intensive. So suffering is are those neuroses. They're the source of our pain, which then cause us to feel like a victim, and then to feel separate, and then to blame everybody else for who I am. And that's just completely ridiculous, you know. So this one of taking responsibility, knowing that I brought myself with me, I created who I am. So if I created it, I can change it. So all that's the sort of approach in Buddhism. So when you finally rid yourself of this dukkha, you've discovered who you really are, you know, and you can throw it away, and then you're going to help other people, because we're all in the same boat.
You see, I find this so refreshing, because I've spoken to, I've got a dear friend of mine who's a Buddhist monk, and well, he claims he's ex, but still he believes all the same things, and he may not be practicing, but pretty much the lens that he looks through his life in is from his exposure to this way of living. And so, you know, a lot of Buddhist monks that I've spoken to have a different viewpoint, that they want to embody the suffering more and go for it more and stay in it, and then throw away this avatar and move right along to the next experience. And
what do you mean staying in the suffering? I don't understand that. What do you mean?
Well, they want to keep the, you know, I'm going to keep going. You see, more suffering equals more suffering until there's no suffering, which is what your admission is. But anyone that I've ever come across is always suffering. They've never found that. They've never got to the other end of the tunnel where they're actually feeling this moment of being Buddha.
Oh, I see. Okay.
At the moment, they're suffering, and you know, for me as a Taoist, that's the first thing we do is, you want to become the master keeper creator of your reality. That starts with the emotions don't control you; you control your emotions.
Oh, sure.
Distraction is the narrative that you perceive that as who you are. And so you can be the true present moment, and the dukkha you can put to the side, tell it to sit, roll over, play dead. That's part of the mastery, that observation, that chill that you and I just got right now. That's real.
I understand.
So that's that truth. And so, you know, my dear friend Martin, he's still observing dukkha, and it's really interesting. He goes, I don't enjoy the energetic component. Like, I'm not, you know, when I feel energy through my body, I actually find it irritating. He goes, I don't want that. Whereas, you know, as a Taoist, we like to immerse ourselves in the alchemy. And
no, I understand. Yes, sure.
And so you're refreshing, because most of the Buddhist monks, like I said, are still, from everything I've experienced through that conversation, are still suffering, and they look for more suffering. They want, but they beg for more suffering. That's what they're asking for. And maybe it's the lens of how they've been taught through their own practices.
And I feel, you know, but I think everybody, we're all at different stages. You know, you can have the same label on our path, but we're all at different stages on that path, and so we're going to express it differently. I mean, certainly in the Buddhist one, and certainly the Tibetan Buddhists, who are the ones that I think in the different cultures in the world have really they're the only ones that have retained the more esoteric teachings, the more advanced, more esoteric, incredibly sophisticated teachings, the Tibetans, you know. So that's where you really engage at the most, where you identify then with your bliss, you identify with the perfection, you identify with your Buddha nature, and you practice identifying with joy. So it's stages and stages and stages, you know. You've got to be where you're at, and it can sound very, very different, you know, on different stages of where you are. So I think that's human beings. That's okay.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. It's just refreshing to hear your
I understand.
on the other side.
I understand.
I got to the other side because I haven't experienced that from a Buddhist monk's perspective.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad there's a different view.
Yeah. I mean, within a Tao, you know, Taoism is kind of a little different. We kind of look at things as, you know, I would look at things like, so within Buddhism is like a pile of dirt covered in diamonds, and you take up another diamond looking for more dirt until it's gone, it's done, it's finished. That's how I observe it. Now, as a Taoist, we look at life like a pile of diamonds covered in dirt. You just cover more. Oh, it's good to be me. And I mean,
that's the way I'd say it. No, I would say that's my approach.
Oh, I love it.
How you discover your true nature. Your true nature is there inescapably. You can never not have it. But like that acorn, I mean, in other words, you can define an acorn as a potential oak tree. It is definitely that, but it's not the oak tree yet. So there it is. The diamond is there, and then you discover it. So it's a similar idea.
Yeah. Latsu, one of my teachers, and I don't know how deep you go into channeling. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You know, I've been channeling for the better part of my whole journey as a priest. So I channel Latsu, and his answer to most people were like clamoring around 2024. This is a moment of change. What's going on? Consciousness, death, destruction, all this stuff. And his answer was really simple. Imagine you're a grain of sand asking the beach, what are we doing today? Fall back into the beach and be realized. It's like, you can't make this stuff up, because
I understand.
The simplicity, it comes right back to what you speak of. You're not going to get shade from an acorn. From the tree, yes.
I understand, yeah. Good.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really amazing, the similarities. And you start to go step back and go, wow, I've got a million different ways I can walk up this mountain, whether it's following this path or that path. But the truth is, there's no limit. And so would you say that you mentioned meditation. Do you use any practices that are more, say, on the processes of like energetic cultivation, for the purpose of nourishing the physical body? Because you look amazing. So whatever you're doing is
Yeah, I understand. Now we have many kinds of meditation. The really most basic ones that the Buddha taught are the ones that the world vaguely calls mindfulness, learning to be focused, so you can start to pay attention to what the hell's going on. But then there are many kinds that in the Tibetan tradition we use a lot of visualization techniques, which are really psychologically very brilliant. Some of that we imagine these kind of archetypes of different Buddha qualities. For example, these images you might see when you see Tibetan Buddhist places, male Buddhas and female Buddhas and wrathful ones and peaceful ones. They're just these kind of symbolic externalizations of our different potentials. So by meditating on the Buddha Tara, this radiant green light, visualizing light coming, she's like a mirror image of that potential. So it enables you to identify with that potential. If you want to work on compassion, you visualize the Buddha of compassion. If you want to work on anger, you visualize this wrathful Buddha who's a wrathful manifestation of purified anger. So there's very skillful ways to do. But there are other meditations like where you learn to using focus just to get in touch with the nature of your mind. No concepts, no visualization, but just learn to get in touch with the true nature of your being, your consciousness. No thoughts, different ones.
Now you just mentioned a bunch of different ways. What was your moment, your epiphany when you realized this was sort of the path for you? And did you have like what most spiritual people would call the awakening? Was there a moment where you felt a shift in your realizing you're not?
No, I don't think it was like that for me at all, son. It was more, first of all, as I said to you, going through this political activity, very intensive, looking for a way to interpret the world. I wanted a coherent kind of methodology, if you like. I really wanted that. And I found that these Tibetan Buddhists, well, subsequently, since I fell into their lap in 1976, I've kind of felt since then, that's why I'm still here, that this was the way that suited my mind. So I really, on the one hand, I like having a coherent philosophical view that's not just hippy trippy, but coherent presentation. But at the same time, to see that that's not just, you don't keep it in your head, that by starting at that level conceptually, it can then gradually seep down and become your experience. Sort of like learning musical theory. You don't just leave it in your head, you then go to the piano and you play it. And that's your method for becoming Bach. I find that very powerful. So for me, it was more like an evolution. I bumped into these lamas, these teachers, and I just knew I'd come home as I was 31. I knew this was my path. Everything in my life led to that. And then very quickly, I also knew I wanted to become a monastic, which means, because by that point, I'd already tried sex and drugs and rock and roll, well, sex and jazz and rock and roll, boys, girls, every imaginable thing. And it didn't work. So I thought that's ridiculous. So it came at a very logical point which I'd given up sex, given up drugs, given up cigarettes, given up alcohol. I think I haven't given up marijuana yet. Not quite yet, but nearly. So then it just fell into place, So I thought, this is the kind of nun I want to be. When I was 2, I wanted to be this Catholic one. So this is where I just, it fell into place. I went to Kathmandu, went to our monastery in Kopan, Kathmandu, and became a nun then. So the monastic way is an extra component for me that has really been very beneficial, that I've wanted. I never wanted to live with a person, never wanted to have sex and drugs, never wanted to have babies and houses, and living in the same bed as another person is a horrible idea to me. I'd rather be independent and free, So that's a very major part for me, the monastic side of it, which I find liberating, not at all. Not in any other way. I find it absolutely liberating. It helps me channel my energy in a better way. So it wasn't a magical thing. It was like a recognition. This was my path, but I allowed it to unfold. I kept following it to see where it would take me. Well, here I am 46 years later, still following it, seeing where it takes me. It's kind of very organic. So it's never been, I don't ever have that kind of revelations. I think that can be very misleading sometimes. You get a bit overexcited. I go one step at a time, one step at a time, one step at a time. I've seen many people have incredible realizations and then next week they give it up and go crazy. I don't want that. I want to be much more steady. So for me, it's a very steady path. You understand my path?
Yeah.
Very steady.
Yeah.
One step at a time.
So when you were discovering this, going through the political spectrums,
yes.
I even think my mother fell victim to the realization that feminism was a mind control psyop. But hey, listen, she went through it and she was like, hang on a second, that doesn't make sense to me. And she was kind of a radical feminist for her time back in the 70s. And it sort of filtered out to a realization that wasn't really beneficial to our overall worldview.
I understand.
Moved on from that, but I find it interesting in that time, especially in Australia and probably world stage, Hare Krishnas were huge.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
Now, how did that present itself? Where were you exposed to? What is the difference between a Hare Krishna and a Buddhist?
Yeah, I think, well, actually, that's the thing, isn't it? So that's, a variation of the Hindu. And the thing is, Buddha came out of that tradition. He came out of the Hindus. They're the ones, as the Dalai Lama says, they're the ones more than 3,000 years ago who began this investigation into the nature of these genius Indians with their incredible sophisticated philosophy, this presentation of the universe. I mean, they're the ones who observe the logic of karma and consciousness and continuity of consciousness. And they're the ones who develop these incredible techniques. I mean, I don't know enough about the Chinese, but I know they were influenced by Buddha, but these Indians, they're the ones, these Hindus, who came up with this skill called, samadhi, this incredibly sophisticated ability to train your mind to go to a subtle level. And that's this technique that then Buddha took with him when he diverged in his own direction. So there's so much of similarity between the Hindu philosophy and the Buddhist, but there's some fundamental differences. Buddha went off in his own direction, So I knew about the Hare Krishnas, but wasn't appealing to me. I was just connected with these Tibetan Buddhists. They're the ones that spoke to me. They're the ones that I felt at home with.
Yeah, I mean, they almost sort of like created this sort of persona that people were actually diverted from, and there was an adverse reaction within the community.
No, it's very interesting, isn't it, how there was such a lot of aversion for them, wasn't there? For some reason there wasn't there? And I think that's not criticizing them or anybody, but I think that's the thing. I mean, here I am looking like a Tibetan Buddhist, these robes, right, and my bald head. But I think there's something that's very important is, I still dress this way, and I'm living in New York City, but somehow we need, in the way we talk and present our ideas, we have to adjust to our culture. I mean, to sit there and act like an 8th century Chinese person in a modern 21st century New York, you're just going to ask for trouble, So we've got to be very flexible. And I think that's what I find. One of my teachers, these Tibetans were stuck in the 14th century, and that was the good side, because until the Chinese communists came along and took their country, and that what kept them intact. But then, you can see that when you come to a different culture, you've got to present it differently. And so for me, that's why it's so important too. When I talk, it's my job to give talks, is to present it in a way that's modern to our culture, without insulting, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but to reinterpret and represent according to the cultures of different people and different needs. It's so important. Otherwise, we're fundamentalists. That's a bit. You're not going to attract anybody by being fundamentalist. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you 1,000,000%.
Yeah.
So if Buddha went on his own path and samatha wasn't his processes, what would you define his what you would?
I'd say the major difference between the Buddha, it's, as I said to you before, it was the Dalai Lama I like to quote this, that it was these Indians who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Well, okay, the Christians call it a soul. The Hindus call it a self or an Atman. The Greeks call it an essence. God knows what we call it in the materialist world. But the Buddhists would say self, yes, is a word. It's just this word. But the Buddha, his main point is that his interpretation of the nature of self, insofar as there's nothing concrete and absolute and self-existent and solid and pointable. It's more flexible and more nuanced than that. That we are a self, but it's not set in stone. The key thing about the Buddha is that everything's infinitely interdependent and everything's not set in stone, and not concrete and solid and absolute. It's spacious, and this is where they talk about emptiness. It's a very powerful view of how things exist. And they talk about dependent arising and emptiness, and how these are the two truths, and how we tend to either grasp that everything is real and absolute, or we throw the baby out with the bathwater and become nihilistic. So this concept of emptiness in Buddhism is the key distinction between him and the Hindus, I would say. And it's a very amazing approach. And this is what we have to learn to realize. Buddha says, we've realized this emptiness, we've realized ourself. We've got rid of the neurotic self and become our true self, if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, within Taoism, we call it the Shen. Shen,
Okay.
Inner power, a spirit.
Okay, there you go. Another word.
Some people will call it soul. And
There
so what would the definition be? So you got samatha. What's the reference to Shiva and Shakti? Is that just within a yogic journey?
They're the Hindus. That's Hindu talk.
Yeah.
It's Hindu, you know, but shamatha is just concentration. It's a name. I think it means literally single pointed concentration, or samadhi, single pointed concentration. That comes from the Hindus, but the Buddha, it's one of the main techniques in the Buddhist. So they say that when you can learn to develop that samadhi, you can go beyond the conceptual, beyond the sensory, to this subtle level of consciousness. And that, because it's sort of like the microscope of your mind, and with that tool you can then do the necessary unpacking and unraveling and the realizing of the, you know, of your true nature. That's basically, it's a technique to enable you to find your true nature, go beyond the grosser level, you know.
Yeah, that's what we call the Wu Ji.
Okay, very good.
The center point of all things, the center of the center of the center. Yeah, I love this. I love this because it really is like a discovery of this incredible universal process that, you know, you're on the other side of the world, I'm on the other side of the world. We have a different path, but it's so universal in so many different ways. But I want to really let the audience remember, and I always tell people this, there's an infinite amount of spirits, entities, energies. You need to value that. I don't put in the same category God with Buddha, with Tao. They're all individual signature frequency and a resonance that goes with it. And if people understand that, then they don't lose sight and dismiss it as a throwaway. And so that traditional processes that we speak of, that you're on the path of, that I'm on the path of, is sharing it with the people that we expose ourselves to. It's so important that you, I don't like using this realm of man word, but you honor, you value, you respect this sort of state, because it is unique, but it's all things. So it's like a unique facet of the same diamond. Does that make sense?
I agree, totally, I agree. And that's why I feel it's, I have such respect for any human beings over the centuries, you know, who are looking into the meaning of life. I mean, it's so rude to be criticizing anybody. And if you look at it, everywhere you turn, the Catholics, the Muslims, the Australian Aboriginals, I mean, look at the Australian Aboriginals, you know, their view of the world is so complex. I can't understand it. But you give humans a half a chance, we're going to look into the meaning of life. And it's wonderful. And we should respect everybody. I think it's ridiculous to get fundamentalist about it. And to see the common ground, to see the commonality. We have to do that.
Right. I always go back to, if you dismiss someone else's belief system, you dismiss your own.
Precisely. Of course you do. Exactly. I agree with
that simplicity. So do you normally work in groups? How do you have is it an individual thing? You go on a path, you get a gathering, a congregation. How do you normally share your understand?
Well, I'm part of this organization of about 100, I suppose about 250 entities, like publishing companies, Buddhist centers, monasteries, retreat centers, you know, hospice services all over the world, right? This is what I've been involved in since I met my teachers in the mid-70s in Australia. And our main monastery is in Kathmandu. That's where I first went. And I think I'm just part of that organization. So for 10 years, I worked with our publishing company, which is one of the main Buddhist publishing companies in the world, Wisdom Publications. I was editorial director. For many years, 15 years, I ran a non-profit mainly in the States, helping people in prison. And they were all connected to this broad organization. And then I've been editing books all these years and writing and editing, and I do that. And I teach. I'm one of the Western teachers in this organization. There's about 100 or 50, 60, 70 Tibetan monks teaching in our different centers, the scholars, you know, and there were many of us Westerners who've been appointed to be one of the teachers. So the last 15 years, I've been on the road almost continuously with no home, just traveling around 50, 60, 70 centers a year around the world. I mean, round the world tickets with Qantas, sort of. But now the last couple of years since the pandemic, things have shifted. I couldn't travel. So I still continue to teach on Zoom. So what happens is these centers invite me to teach, and I thank them, and then we organize a meeting, you know. So, but at the same time, I'm also editing and training people to edit and transcribe and edit the teachings of my teachers and my masters. So that's what I'm doing more now. That's why I'm settled down now in New York City in my own place. The last time I had a place when I was 23, I think, in London, and I was paying £5 a week for a little bed sit, which you call a studio now. So it's the first time I'm sort of settled down in my old age. It's curious. But I continue to teach and travel. Next week, I'm going to Santa Fe, to our center there for 2 weeks to teach at our center. Then in August, I go to London and Stockholm and a few other places. Then in November, I go to Australia and France and different. So I travel a little bit still, teach on Zoom, and edit my books. And yeah, that's how I spend my time.
So when you say transcribe, are you transcribing Buddhas
Okay,
spoken?
my main teachers, Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, my two main teachers who I've met since the 70s. Lama Yeshe passed away in the 80s, and then Lama Zopa passed away last year. And we have this archive of all their teachings that have been videoed or recorded. And so most are just sitting there. So we want to publish them. And so they need to be transcribed properly and checked and edited. So that's been my skill all my life. And so I'm training people to do that.
Wow. How old was the last teacher that passed away?
Lama Zopa was the same age as me. 70.
Oh, wow.
He was 7. I'm 80, so he was 79 when he passed away.
You're a sprite young thing.
I know, it's so strange. I seem so silly saying 80, but it's a fact. What can I do? I still feel like I'm 15. You know.
I promise you. When my mother sees this video, she's going to be like, "I need."
Maybe your mother and I are contemporaries. How old is your mum?
80.
Well, there you go. Maybe we were feminists in the same time. Was she a feminist in Australia?
Yeah.
What's her name?
Rosalind.
Rosalind.
Yeah.
We might have met. I mean, I was in London. I was a radical feminist, but then I was in Australia for a while. And then 72, 73, I was 74. So maybe we bumped into each other in Melbourne.
Well, yeah, it was an interesting time. I don't. As a child, I don't look at it as a negative viewpoint. No. If anything, I found like I connected with my yin.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, exactly.
Deeper understanding of that, and I attribute that to sort of like activating what within Taoism we call the yin eyes, the high intuitive state of awareness. Yes. And so drop into very, very clear, definitive, clear sense states. Good. And access information very quickly. And I believe that has everything to do with that journey that I had as a young boy. So,
I'm sure, yes. You are very fortunate to have it.
Yeah, it is interesting, but it's funny when you come to a point of consciousness and you become sober with the realization that, hang on, that wasn't what I thought it was. I thought I was part of an expansive experience, and it was actually more contractive and controlling.
There you go. No, I understand.
I think that's probably where perhaps maybe you came to that realization through your own journey. Was that
that's right? Absolutely.
The places that you moved through from the political spectrum were more controlling as opposed to?
Well, I mean, the way I'd say it was all the political ones. I don't criticize anything. I mean, if you can get out there and try to make the world a better place, use whatever method you can, But I could say the main emphasis, the big shift for me when I heard these Buddhists, I mean, sort of like I joke about it all my life. Like I said before, I was looking for something out there as the cause, of everything. And then they basically said to me, well, you know what? Guess what, Robina? You got to look inside. And I'd never heard of that before. So I tried all options of blaming the outside world for both my happiness and my suffering. But they said, no, honey, it's in here. So that was the shift for me.
Have you had moments where you felt like you were tapping into a knowing? That
I think, as I said before, for me, it's an ongoing unraveling, a gradual, steady process. And I like that. Yeah, I don't want any kind of extra special trippy things. You can get too carried away. It's a gradual process, and I like because then it becomes more steady and more solid. Mm-hmm. You get a bit emotional sometimes. I don't want that. I mean, I want to be emotional. I'm happy to be emotional, but I want the realizations to be steady and rooted in reality, not fantasy.
And no, so when you're transcribing your teacher's scripture,
yes.
Spoken word, what is that translated to? I mean, in this day and age, wouldn't you have a foundation from Buddha that would be insightful, or how are they giving a different lens on what it is?
That's really what the Buddhist one. There's a big emphasis, certainly in Tibet. They go to these monasteries, they do their meditations, they learn the philosophy, they internalize it with their meditations, and then they're requested. You would never do it if you weren't asked. Then you were requested to give a teaching, to explain it. So that's really what he's doing. He's out there. He was teaching it to other people. And that's what he told me I should do 30 years ago. He said, I need to go out and teach. So I do my best. I internalize it first, and then, because, you can't just talk from your head. You've got to talk from your heart. So to the degree that I've internalized any of this philosophical stuff and worked hard on myself and practiced is the extent to which I want to be of benefit to others, to lead them to where they have to go, So that's what you use your words to help others.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. It's like, hang on a second, it's that simple. Let's be now, be this present
We need
moment.
to be authentic, not intellectual and arrogant. I mean, I think part of the problem in the West, we're a little bit arrogant. We can get carried away with intellectual knowledge and forget to put it into practice, and that's a big danger.
And how would that represent, like, within you when you go to the monasteries and you're traveling the world and you're representing your teachers? How does that present itself? Do you have like do you specifically refer to anything as like mental, emotional, spiritual healing? Do people have those moments? Have you ever experienced anything where you could go, there was this one moment where this person was like completely sick, and through the teachings they were completely physically healed? Have you had moments like
Yeah, I can certainly see many experiences of that, of people who are really practicing, can have incredible experiences of healing their own selves, not even in a magical sense, in a natural sense, because you can see the interconnectedness. I mean, certainly in the esoteric teachings, the Vajrayana teachings, the Tantrayana teachings that are really all living extant among the Tibetan Buddhists. I mean, it's, it's logical that there's this intimate relationship between the internal subtle physical energies and the mental consciousness. So, I mean, the Tibetan medical system, which is a bit like the Chinese, that's based on those teachings. And so for example, Lama Zopa said, even because the Buddhist view of karma is that every single thing you think and do and say doesn't go astray, it programs who you become, which is very logical, really. I mean, if you sit there being angry every day, even though you pretend not to be, what do you think you're doing to yourself? You're producing a horrible, unhappy person. So anything you think and do and say produces who you become. And this more esoteric system, and the Tibetan medical system uses it, and it's in the Vajrayana. You've got this subtle nervous system, 72,000 subtle channels, and coursing through those channels is all this subtle wind energy, the prana, and then connected to that inextricably is all your different states of mind. So you go to your Tibetan doctor, she feels your imbalance of some wind energy, and she knows that's related to your crazy attachment and your craving, and she can see how that's polluting you. So by changing your mind, you change your body. So you can of course, it's a natural process that you would heal yourself. If you change your mind and become less neurotic, less angry, less jealous, more positive, more optimistic, more compassionate, more kind, then you also affect your body, and you can purify your body through that system. It's very logical, not mystical,
Yeah, I mean that's very, if not the same, but very similar to a Taoist alchemy practice.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
arrived, thousands of years ago within the Yellow Emperor's sort of discovery of his whisperings of the universe and creating the infrastructure of the Chinese cultures we know it today.
Yeah,
and from that was the Chinese medicine. And
that's right, exactly. So it's so similar. That's right. The Ayurvedic, the Chinese, this Tibetan one, they're so similar. And they're actually, even now, just beginning to discover, in the West, the wisdom of these systems. It's incredible.
Well, they're instantaneous. This is not something that you have to work at. If you create that signature frequency and you resonate there, you will see a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical change right there.
Yes,
and I think that's one of the most potent evidence-based sort of like experience when you can like attune to a scripture. You can attune to something that's infused as say, for example, you as a vehicle, as a tuning fork of that transmission in that higher level, and you're imprinting it into the scripture that you're transcribing. That is powerful. That's living.
Yes,
and
exactly.
When people read that, it's a visceral feeling, like the one we're having right now. It's visceral. You're like, hang on a second, this resonates with me, and it's not a like you said, a scholar intellect throwaway word. You're experiencing that.
That's right. Exactly.
And I think,
that's important.
What do you think of that? Because right now it's like new age. I've got this experience. I had my angels come and see me. 30 years ago when I was on this path and started as a priest, people are like, coming to me with diagnosis, what they call psychotic episodes. For me, part of the deeper nature of one of my lineages is working with low watt energy, i.e. darker matter, whatever you want to call it. Now, within Taoism, we go, light and dark are two of the same. It's not like good and evil. That's a representation of your perspective of reality within a duality that forms these sort of constructs. So if you are presented with that and you're operating in the duality aspect, then we'll go deeper into ritual that would represent itself. And quite frankly, this particular monastery that I was ordained at, they specialized in exorcism. So that identification is there, and people can throw it away, whatever. But I've found over all these years that it depends on where that person is in their own development within duality, that they will draw this evidence-based sort of energy, entity, spirit to their experience. So when you do that type of stuff, how is that represented within your teachings?
Well, I know there are many people, there are many of these Tibetan masters, yogis and Tibetan doctors who are skillful at this. And there are lots of practices also in the Tibetan tradition. You argue they could be called exorcism, but these holy beings, they're clairvoyant, they can see and they can do practices that help the person heal, either removing external forces or even just helping their mind heal. There's many people like that, many great yogis, many meditators and qualified people. So I have respect for them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's part of the tradition, in my opinion.
Exactly.
And so when that presents itself, when we talk about duality, I think it's really interesting that we should shine a light on, you mentioned karma, because karma from a Taoist perspective is completely subject to your own journey. So that will be relevant.
What did you say? It's completely what?
Karma is subjected to the duality that you're experiencing. So you will change it. A lot of people tend to go, well, okay, it's part of your contract, what you come into this world in. It relates back to many lifetimes. There's this contract, and I appreciate that. That's one way to perceive it, one way to experience it, and it's validated by you to be true or not true by the evidence-based experience. Yet within a Taoist model, karma is sort of like the subject of duality, and once you create that non-dualist sort of understanding, you can alter consciousness any way you want. So you're not limited by physiology, neurology, biology, astrology, numerology. These are things that people tend to use as an absolute. And I think we need to get back to what you said, because I agree, there is no absolute. And when you get to that place where you're all with all things, that means that you are the 12 zodiac signs. You are the universe. You are the Tao. You are Buddha. You're all. You are this present moment. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts?
No, I think it sounds great what you're saying. I agree with you. It's good. It's good. But sometimes we've got to work in different areas. Sometimes the dualistic explanation is important first. It's a bit like you got to learn all the boring old theory about music first before you can experience the taste of it. You don't chuck it out, but you don't stay stuck in it. It's a stepping stone to the experience, and you've got to use whatever method works for you.
Yeah. Well, I want to make it clear to the audience, I'm not dismissing duality, because
exactly
that, but I mean, that's generally where the karmic model is most.
That's right. No, precisely. It's in the dualistic view. That's like the musical theory. You've got to talk about it, and then you get the experience.
Yes.
That's for me why I talk about a gradual steps. I like the gradual unfolding. That's a method that works for me. Steady, it keeps steady.
And so, would you come from a position where karma is something that, like, for example, it reminds me of a moment that this actress Shirley MacLaine spoke of. She immersed herself in Buddhism, and she was on some type of like river in a boat, and she looked to the shore side, and there's a woman waiting for a boat to come up, and she was holding her baby, and witnessed this woman, the baby fell out of her hands, and the woman stood there and watched the baby drown, and she was just completely mortified. She was shocked. And the woman's answer was, well, that was karma. I can't do anything about that. What are your thoughts?
That's terrible. I find that not appropriate interpretation.
No, I don't find it appropriate either, but it was so riveting for her to get an explanation like that.
I know that's very, of course, it's very strange. So there's a more subtle way of talking. The Buddhist view about how everything has no intrinsic nature. Things are dependent arising. So karma can be used there too. And the way my teacher would say, everything we experience is our own karmic appearance. So if I come into this world with lots of anger, the habit of anger, then I will see everything through the lenses of anger. So everything is my karmic appearance through my own anger. So when we can start to realize that things don't exist like that your mind is like a mirror. And if my mirror is polluted by anger, the world will appear terrible. But if I can realize it's just my karmic appearance, you don't hold on to it. So it can be very beneficial to think like that. that things have a much more subtle nature. So it's not to believe in our narrow karmic appearance, and therefore to look back into the mirror and fix the mirror, leave the world alone.
So, I mean, that really comes back to something I kind of like, I bring it right down to the basic OG perception. And people are like, well, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Your glass is half empty or full. How do you see the world?
Yeah, that's right. It's the view. It's how you view things. Yeah. And that's why I find it very moving and empowering. I work with people in prison. I ran this nonprofit based in California, like thousands of prisoners, mainly in this country. And the very moving experience for me of many of my friends in prison, the most amazing practitioners, because you see, they can't change their external world. So they don't have a choice. Your back's against the wall. You either go mad or you change your mind, and that's really essentially what Buddha's saying. We can change the way we perceive the universe, right? So that I have these such good examples of amazing human beings. One of them, this woman on death row in Florida for 17 years, completely innocent. And, but she is in her own cell on her own, going completely crazy. Her husband was executed. His head burst into flames. She lost her children. She lost her family, like this nightmare. This woman locked in 24 hours a day in a cell. And she said, finally, I realized I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So she transformed herself. But she really realized that what goes on in here is the main source, not the world. And that's pretty incredible. It's pretty amazing. It's like emotional intelligence to discover that. In other words, she didn't believe in her karmic appearance. She was able to take responsibility. And that's kind of powerful. Such admiration.
Oh, yeah. I mean, from one of my teachers, the Jade Emperor, he always reminds you, let the man who's never left his village, let him know he's seen the world.
Okay.
And that just comes right to it. It's evident. It's all here. Mm-hmm. It's not out there. Mm-hmm. And when you come to that realization, all of a sudden, so what was the end result? Is she still there, or
no? She finally got out after 17 years, and that's the irony. Because many people, many of the friends I know you go mad in prison because you feel so hopeless. But the irony was, because she put herself together, didn't buy into all the nonsense. She kept her sanity, so she continued to work on her freedom. She didn't have this view of. She doesn't talk about karma, but she didn't just go, oh well, this is how it is. I'll sit back and let the baby drown. She continued to work on her freedom, and after 17 years, she was finally found to be innocent and got out. And she's this little old lady now in a wheelchair, and you'd never know she'd been through this, because she dealt with it. She worked with it. She transformed it, And that's real practice. She doesn't use it.
I was going to say, this is profound.
That's right.
This comes right back to, in lots of ways, as we're sort of like on this journey, realizing we are all things, there's this humanist that sort of perceives things within emotions and daily life, and the materialism that's presented to you, identifying with the reflection of what's in the mirror as if that's you, right? It's like when you realize, and the Jade Empress says the same thing, when you realize you're not of this body, what can harm you?
Exactly. That's right.
Nothing.
That's a pretty amazing one to do, and on her own. She found it in herself. She had no external condition. She had no external things to read or no one to turn to. She had this astonishing ability to find it in herself. That's pretty remarkable.
Well, would you say your relationship with her helped her on that path, or?
No, I didn't know her in prison. I only met her since that.
Oh, wow.
She's got no spiritual path. She doesn't talk about God or religion or karma. She just, she's very amazing, very humble, unusual, extraordinary human being. And now she lives in Ireland, and she helps other people who've been exonerated from prison. She's amazing.
So if we were to look at this and sort of attempt to unravel this, when you realize who you really are, like all the nonsense and stagnation of the erratic sort of like low frequency, low watt that created her reality. Once she attuned through her own method, her own realization, through that, and she finally attuned to a high resonance, it resulted in her freedom. It resulted in a change of her whole life.
That's right, exactly.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that?
Well, I think she just did the work. She made it happen. She didn't think. The typical one in prison is you become so hopeless. You don't lift a finger to help yourself. You just become hopeless. So you stay stuck. But she never became hopeless. So she kept energetic and dynamic and using opportunities. She didn't just become paralyzed by it. It's putting it in simple terms. It was very empowering, very incredible, very admirable.
And from her admission, when did she start to understand that? From Yeah, you said she was there 17 years, but
17
when did
years.
that become realized for her? And then how long was it from when she had the moment of realization to when she got out? How
It was,
long?
again, for her, great. I mean, I think it was, well, it was 12 years on death row and then another 5 years before they let her out. So it must have been, as she said, finally I realized I couldn't change anything. So you obviously go through the process of thinking, well, they're going to see this is not true. And then you go through the court, then you go through the prosecution and the police and the judges, and then you get the death sentence, and then the husband, and then he gets executed. I mean, you can imagine one nightmare after another. And I suppose it was just this process for her. I mean, she's very, very extraordinary. I have such admiration because she doesn't label herself as any one of these things. She just found this human ability to change her mind, to see things differently. She doesn't even use religious spiritual words for it. It's very powerful. I admire her greatly.
So when you decided that a lot of your attention would be well served within a prison system, have you noticed a consistent? What I remind people of is when they're confronted with the sober reality that they're brought into. I am of this body. They're brought into the emotions, and then, either it's a fit of rage or it's a bad decision that you've made, and then you sober up and go, "I made a very big mistake." Even from the lens of, say, being given time isolated within a system like a jail or prison, this sort of changes this ability to process things and maybe perhaps slows people down to realize there's more to their reality than what they see before them. What do you think you've gathered as a consensus within your journeys helping people within the system that they've gathered the epiphany? Because a lot of people go, I found God. I found God. I found God. I'm reborn. And then I believe from what I can see, there's a lot of delusion, and it's delusion. And then there's people that truly have become in tune with this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I just put in more practical. I just put in practical terms. They decided there they are stuck in prison, and they want to start taking responsibility, want to give up anger and rage and blame, and so they start using the ones that I helped because I mean they resonated with the Buddhist approach, and they're the ones who stayed around and the ones I supported. And I'm still in touch with many of them after 25 years. Some of them, some on death row. They just work away, practicing and becoming just these more easygoing, down to earth, happy human beings. What can I tell you?
And was there a theme? Was there a theme? Was there a consensus? But there's a certain tipping point?
I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't say about that. I don't know about that.
Right. They just they resonated with your teaching, and
each person was different. Each one's so different. They're all very different, But I can think of one of them on death row, Mitchell in Kentucky. He's just this dude who was involved in drugs in the 80s, and people died, and he's on death row, and he's just working away every day, practicing, helping his friends on death row, making things for people. He's a very simple, humble human being, but very content, very fulfilled, very relaxed, very content. I'm ready for that electric jolt, he said,
Wow. Well, I mean, that really is that embodies what I just said. When you believe you're not of this body, what can harm you?
Right. That's exactly right.
Nothing.
Right.
Is there any way for him to, a lot of people would refer to this new spiritual age perspective, manifest their way out of that situation? What are your thoughts of?
He does his work every day. He practices every day. He's got a lawyer. And then, the thing is with the system in this country, every time you have a lawyer, I mean, if you didn't appeal your sentence, you'd be dead in a month. But most people appeal, and that means you've got another 30 years of life because the system takes a long time. So it's kind of ironic. All these taxpayers paying for all these people to have free lawyers on death row, and they want these people to suffer, but in fact, they're keeping them alive. So it's so ironic in a way. Anyway, apart from all that, he has a lawyer, and then there's something happens, and then they complain about something, and then something goes on, and he has 2 more years. He's just living his life. He happens to be living in a red jumpsuit in a garbage dump place in Kentucky. That's all. But he's a happy guy. What can I say?
And have you ever had anyone sort of like have an adverse reaction to your offering to help them?
Well, I don't offer to help. This is the thing in the Buddhist one, you would never reach out to offer to help. People would write to us. People would hear it on the grapevine about the work we were doing, or they'd get a book from a friend and they would write. And then they would write, and as long as they wrote, we would write back and give them a mentor to write to. And then if they asked you to visit, then I'd visit. And here I am, 25, 27 years later, still friends with Mitch. I mean, that's how it went. he wants what I have to give, and so I keep giving it. And if he didn't want it, I mean, many of the people who wrote to us, they for a while would practice, and one of them wrote back and said, well, I've decided now I'm a Muslim. And we said, well done. I'm very happy for you. Keep going, So if you don't want what we have, it's up to the person. They lead the way.
And would you call that someone just resonating at your frequency, that they come to that spot where they want whatever you're offering, as opposed
you're on a similar, you've got a similar language. I mean, you say frequency is the same, isn't it? When I first heard these teachings, it resonated with me. It suited my mind, That's right. That's the people I try to help. I try to help people according to their needs, If they don't want it anymore, they say goodbye.
Right.
Yeah.
So in summation, you've been on this journey for close
46, 45. It's 40. What is it? 40. What is it now? 24. 40. That's 48 years. Sorry, 48 years since I met them. My lamas, my teachers.
And how do you feel about your journey and
so far so good? So far so good. That's it. So far so good. One step at a time. So far so good. Happy, content, fulfilled, ready for death.
Wow.
For the next one. Just keep moving.
And do you feel like it continued to get expansive, or there was moments of contraction?
Well, in a sense, as long as you keep practicing, it might look like contraction when the shitty stuff happens. But I mean, as one of my teachers says, the dirt has to come out. So when you're practicing, it's like going to a washing machine. So the bad things can happen, but you don't interpret them as bad. You interpret them as good. All part of the process.
Amazing. It's just so refreshing for me.
Good.
I love having conversation with like-minded beings, and I mean, truly, that's what it is. We resonate. Yeah. That's how we came together. I mean,
I'm so happy. So glad you contacted me, son. I'm so delighted.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how I reached out to you. Like your frequency was speaking to me, my friend.
Wasn't just my Australian accent.
yeah. Well, and that's it. It's like you just sort of. You like attracts like, from a simplicity.
That's it. So you keep moving, you keep doing your wonderful job and helping people. It's amazing. Well done. I'm so happy. Say hello to Rosalind.
I will. And if you're ever out this way, you can always come down to Las Vegas.
Well, I haven't been to Las Vegas. I often thought I'd go to Las Vegas. I only usually go where I'm invited when I go to teach.
Well, I'll be inviting you out here, and there's a place to stay, and you can come out.
I might even come to Las Vegas then. I'd love it. You can show me around. You can take me on, you can gallivant around Las Vegas together.
Yeah, I think it would be fun. Yeah.
Good.
And so, in closing, I'm going to put all your social media or anywhere that people can find you. I know your admission, you're not a big social media person, but whatever.
Well, I mean, people put me. I'm on there apparently. I mean, TikTok and I do these 2-minute videos every 3 days, something to think about, and so people put them on for me. They take care of it for me. I don't look. I'm on there and I answer questions. People write to me, so I get them sent to me. So I think it's a good thing to do. I'm very happy about it. I just don't happen to go there. I don't even know my password. But yeah. So can I sing a prayer to finish? A little baby prayer.
Absolutely. I would love that. And then can I ask you one question before you do this? What's your definition of consciousness?
Consciousness is the capacity for awareness and knowing. It's the energy of the universe that knows. That can know things as they are being. That means when you've accomplished that, when you've perfected that, your consciousness pervades the universe. How could it not? It's oneness with all beings. It has infinite wisdom and infinite power and infinite empathy. That's the potential of our consciousness, and we're on that one. That's how we refer to Buddha, as whatever words you'd call.
I'm blown away. I've never heard the same answer. And every time you speak, there's a resonance that I'm experiencing. Wow. So I'm getting high as a spiritual kite. Put it that way.
So I'll sing this little tiny prayer, just 30 seconds in Tibetan. It just means may compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. It's very short. Okay.
I love it.
Good. Jangchub semchog Rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyochig ke pa nyampa me pa yang gong ne gong du pa sho.
Ooh. Well, thank you so very much, my friend. I'm so grateful that you spent your time with us today, and that prayer was profound. For all my students, all the OGs of this channel, they're going to get very spiritually high from that.
I'm so happy. I'll see you in Las Vegas, okay?
Yeah, I'll see you in Las Vegas.
Good.
I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today.
Yes.
And I am your humble servant and seafood Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you on the next one, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you, dearest.